Raylen Holt's pulse quickened as his phone's screen flickered to life. The city sounds of downtown Chicago hummed in the background, distant and faint. But in the quiet of his penthouse, the only thing that mattered was the screen in front of him. His stomach dropped as his eyes locked onto the live feed from his mansion's nursery. Lisa, the new maid, was sprawled on the floor, blood streaking down her cheek. Her arms were wrapped protectively around his 6-month-old twins, Layla and Alex. The babies, thankfully, were unharmed, but the chaos around them painted a picture of terror. Overturned toys and a broken bassinet littered the floor. The nursery, once serene and calm, now looked like a battlefield. The worst part? A man stood in the corner of the room, wearing a gray windbreaker, his face hidden in shadow. But his presence was unmistakable. Raylen's heart raced. His fingers trembled as he gripped his phone tighter. This wasn't just a break-in. This was something personal. His mind scrambled, the icy fingers of dread tightening around his chest. He had installed the cameras for security, yes, but his paranoid fears had always been about one person, Ava. Was this connected to her? Was she back? His stomach churned at the thought. Ava, his estranged wife, had walked away 6 months ago, taking everything with her. Was she now coming back to finish what she started? To take the children from him, or worse, destroy what was left of his life? Raylen Holt was used to watching over his family from a distance, but nothing could prepare him for the shocking scene that played out on his surveillance feed. As panic set in, he was forced to make a decision that would change everything. What happened next? Keep watching to find out. If you're intrigued by this story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Raylen Holt had built an empire. He was one of the wealthiest men in the city, a successful businessman who commanded the kind of power most could only dream of. But none of that mattered anymore. All the money, the power, the accolades, none of it could fill the void left behind when Ava, his wife, walked out of their life 6 months ago. The day she left was etched in his memory as if it had happened just yesterday. Ava, his high school sweetheart, the woman he thought he would spend the rest of his life with, had disappeared in an instant. There had been no fight, no argument. She had simply packed a bag, taken half of their assets, and left him alone with their 2 children, Layla and Alex. Her departure wasn't just an emotional blow. It was a betrayal, and it shattered Raylen in ways he couldn't quite explain. His trust had been irreparably broken, and the walls he had once built around his life came crashing down, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. The days following Ava's departure were a blur of numbness. Raylen threw himself into work, but even the long hours couldn't distract him from the chaos that had unraveled his personal life. His children, once the light of his life, were now the only reason he kept going. Layla and Alex, his twins, barely 6 months old when Ava had left, needed him. But the loneliness, the hollow ache of abandonment, gnawed at him day and night. To cope, Raylen turned inward, isolating himself from the world. He hired staff, but no one was allowed near the twins without his approval. He trusted no one, especially after Ava's calculated disappearance. The one person who had promised him a life together had ripped it all away without warning. In an attempt to protect his children, Raylen transformed his mansion into a fortress. He spared no expense, hiring top-tier security and installing state-of-the-art surveillance systems. Cameras were everywhere, even in the most intimate spaces. The nursery, where the twins spent most of their time, was the most heavily monitored room. It wasn't Lisa, the new maid, that had triggered this paranoid need for security. No, this obsession had started long before she had even come into the picture. Raylen had been through too much. Ava's betrayal had warped him into someone who trusted no one, not even those who worked under his roof. Lisa had seemed different when she arrived. Soft-spoken, reliable and professional. She had a quiet way about her that made her stand out from the others. Raylen watched her with a mix of appreciation and wariness, constantly observing her every move, measuring her actions. But he never truly trusted her. How could he? Not after what Ava had done. But it wasn't Lisa's actions that Raylen feared the most. It was the thought of what might come back from the past. One night in the dead of the evening, Raylen sat in his penthouse, staring at the nursery feed on his phone, a habit that had become routine over the past few months. What he saw this time, though, shattered his world. Lisa was sprawled on the floor, blood dripping down her face, her body curled around the twins. The scene unfolded in slow motion, and Raylen felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Lisa's bloodied face, her bruised arms. She had been protecting his children from something or someone. Bottles were scattered across the floor. A broken bassinet lay in pieces, and a toy, mobile, slowly spun above them, casting a haunting reflection in the empty room. And then, in the corner of the feed, the shadow of a man, tall, dark, and moving quickly, came into view. The man wore a gray windbreaker, his face obscured in the darkness. But Raylen knew that figure. It wasn't just any intruder. This was someone from his past. A ghost he thought was long buried. The man's presence sent a chill down Raylen's spine. But it was the identity of the man that truly rocked him to his core. Max Carter, Ava's old associate, a criminal with ties to the underworld, a man Raylen had once trusted, until he realized just how deep Ava's manipulations went. Raylen leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. How had Max found his way back into his life, into his home? And more importantly, why? A flashback took him to the moment when Ava had walked out, leaving behind nothing but a note, a few belongings, and an ocean of questions. This isn't the life I wanted. That was all she had written. Raylen could still remember the sting of those words, the bitter taste of abandonment that had followed. She took half of everything they had built together. Money, assets, even the family home. But what hurt the most was the children. Ava had taken Layla and Alex away, leaving Raylen with nothing but memories and a legacy of deceit. The betrayal ran deep, and Raylen had spent the last 6 months trying to rebuild his life, only to find that the ghosts of the past had come back to haunt him. The shadowy figure in the nursery, the bloodied maid, and the cold realization that Ava's betrayal wasn't over. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. Ava had never truly left. Now, Raylen had to face the consequences of his past mistakes. He needed answers, not just for himself, but for the future of his children. The fight for their safety had only just begun. As he prepared to leave his penthouse and rush back to his mansion, Raylen could already feel the weight of the past catching up with him. The walls he'd built around his heart were about to crumble. This was no longer just about protecting his wealth or his children. It was about confronting the demons of his past and surviving the truth of who Ava had really been. Lisa Brown had been a quiet presence in Raylen's life since the day she arrived at his mansion. She was soft-spoken, her movements purposeful yet graceful, a stark contrast to the chaos Raylen felt inside. She seemed like the perfect fit for the job. Her resume was sparse, 2 pages handwritten references, but something about her calm demeanor had put Raylen at ease, at least for a time. She was gentle with the twins, Layla and Alex, handling them with a level of care Raylen hadn't expected. He'd watched her from afar as she rocked Layla to sleep, her fingers brushing the baby's soft cheek. She was patient, almost maternal in her devotion to their well-being, something he hadn't seen in anyone since Ava had left. But even as Raylen noticed the tenderness with which Lisa cared for his children, a nagging feeling lingered. His mind, forever tainted by betrayal, couldn't help but question her motives. Was she just playing the part? Was she too good to be true? Lisa's background was something Raylen never pressed her on. She didn't talk much about herself, always shifting the conversation back to the children, always smiling politely but never offering more than what was needed. But there was something in the way she moved, a quiet confidence in the way she handled herself, that made Raylen curious. He noticed how strong she was physically. She never seemed to break a sweat, even as she lifted the twins in and out of their cribs, fed them, and cleaned up their messes with military precision. At first, he attributed it to her being young and energetic. But over time, Raylen began to suspect there was more to Lisa than met the eye. He caught glimpses of the disciplined way she carried herself, how her posture never faltered, how she moved with purpose, like a woman trained to withstand challenges. Her movements were precise, economical, like a soldier. Raylen's mind started to make connections, subtle ones, like the way she reacted when a box fell from a high shelf. Without thinking, she immediately dropped into a crouch, her back straight, her hands ready. It was a reflex, the kind of instinct Raylen knew well from his years in business. When you're always on alert, always prepared, days turned into weeks, and Lisa's presence grew more integrated into the rhythm of the household. The twins, once wary of anyone other than their mother, began to bond with her. They smiled when she entered the room, cooing and gurgling in a way Raylen hadn't seen before. It was clear that Lisa had a natural gift for caring for children. Raylen couldn't help but notice the way Layla's tiny fingers would grip Lisa's hand when she was upset, how Alex would fall asleep in her arms without a fuss. She was a calming presence in the house, a stark contrast to the chaos Raylen had felt in the aftermath of Ava's departure. Despite his growing respect for Lisa, Raylen struggled internally. He wanted to trust her. He truly did. But his trauma from the past kept him on edge. Every time she entered a room, Raylen watched closely, trying to read her, trying to figure out if there was a crack in her perfect facade. But he never found one. Her loyalty, though, remained something he questioned. It wasn't that Lisa had given him any reason to doubt her. It was that Raylen had been scarred by betrayal before, and the wounds weren't so easily healed. His life had been a fortress, and he couldn't allow even a crack to form. Not again. It was late one night when Raylen checked the nursery feed, a habit he had developed over the past few months. He wasn't worried. He knew Lisa was there with the twins, and she had been nothing but reliable. But what he saw shook him to his core. Lisa was on the floor, her face bloodied and bruised, her body twisted in an awkward position. The twins were crying in the corner of the room, their tiny arms reaching for her, as if they sensed something was wrong. Raylen's heart slammed in his chest. He could hear the panic rising in his throat as he watched the live footage. But what truly terrified him was the figure standing in the corner of the room. A man tall, wearing a gray windbreaker, his face hidden in shadow. Raylen's stomach churned as the figure moved closer to Lisa. The next few moments were a blur. Raylen watched in horror as Lisa, despite her injuries, struggled to shield the twins from the intruder. She fought back, her arms flailing as she tried to protect them. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for them. Lisa's years of training were evident. Her movements were efficient, precise, as if her body knew what to do even when her mind couldn't process the situation. She didn't hesitate. She went straight into defense mode, using whatever she could, throwing a toy, knocking over a lamp, anything to keep the intruder at bay. But it wasn't enough. She was knocked to the ground, and for a moment Raylen feared the worst. His finger hovered over the phone, ready to dial the police, but his body froze. He couldn't move. His eyes locked on the feed, watching as Lisa struggled to her feet. She wasn't done yet. She wasn't giving up, not while the twins were still in danger. With one final push, Lisa managed to get between the intruder and the babies, using her body to block the path. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the feed went dark. Raylen's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a break-in. This was an attack. And Lisa had been the one to protect his children, just as she had always promised. The trust he had slowly built in her was shattered in that instant. But what terrified him more than anything was the thought that the shadows of his past had come back to haunt him, threatening the family he had desperately tried to protect. And now, as the sirens wailed in the distance, Raylen knew he had to face the truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. Raylen's hands trembled as he replayed the footage from the nursery. His eyes flicked over the chaotic scene. The overturned bassinet, the discarded toys, Lisa's bloodied form lying defenseless on the floor, and the shadowy figure in the corner. But it was the sight of the silver pendant beneath the crib that stopped his breath cold. It was impossible. There, glinting in the dim light of the nursery camera, was Ava's pendant, the same one he had locked away after she walked out of his life 6 months ago. The delicate silver chain, the intricate floral design, the piece of jewelry she had worn almost every day since they'd met, it was unmistakable. And yet there it was, lying on the floor as if dropped carelessly by the intruder. Raylen's stomach lurched, and for a moment he thought he might choke on the air in his lungs. He had locked that pendant away, stored it in the back of his safe, buried beneath the weight of his past. It was one of the few things he had kept from the wreckage of his life with Ava. He hadn't even seen it since the night she left, the night she took everything, half his fortune, his trust, and the love he thought they shared. The night she abandoned him and their children without a single word, leaving behind only the cold silence of a house turned empty. But now the pendant was there in the nursery, a stark reminder that Ava wasn't just gone. She was still pulling the strings. She was still in control, orchestrating events from behind the scenes, her shadow stretching over every aspect of his life. Raylen's heart sank into the pit of his stomach. The pieces were falling into place too quickly. The break-in, the violence, the masked figure in the gray windbreaker. It all pointed to something far more sinister than a simple robbery. His eyes narrowed as he zoomed in on the figure in the corner of the nursery. The man's face was still obscured, his body hidden behind the dark shadows that clung to the edges of the camera's view. But as the feed flickered for a moment, a flash of light illuminated the figure's features. Raylen's breath caught in his throat. The man wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some faceless thug hired to intimidate. No, Raylen knew him. He knew the broad shoulders, the stocky frame, the confident stance that suggested experience in violence. This man was Max Carter, an old associate of Ava's, a man who had once been part of her inner circle, deeply embedded in her criminal dealings. Max Carter was trouble. He had a long history of illegal activities, money laundering, extortion, shady deals with the underworld. Ava had always known how to surround herself with the right people, the dangerous ones who could get things done without asking questions. But why would Max be here, in Raylen's home, in the dead of night, attacking Lisa and threatening his children? The realization hit Raylen like a freight train. This was a random act of violence. It wasn't just a botched robbery. This was orchestrated, carefully planned by Ava herself. She had sent Max here. He was the pawn in a much larger game. Raylen's mind raced as the gravity of the situation settled in. Ava had been manipulating people from the shadows, setting things in motion long before he even realized it. She hadn't just walked away from him. She had left behind a trail of destruction, a web of lies and deceit, all designed to regain control of his life and his legacy. Max Carter was just the first piece in a much larger puzzle. A puzzle Raylen was now forced to solve if he wanted to keep everything he had left, his family, his fortune, and the life he had built. As the camera feed continued to flicker, Raylen's pulse quickened. He couldn't breathe. Ava wasn't just back for revenge. No, she had come to reclaim everything she thought was hers, everything he had built in the years since she left. Ava had always been about control. She had left with half his assets, But Raylen had always known that wasn't enough for her. She didn't just want money. She wanted power. She wanted to be the one who dictated the course of his life. And now, she was doing it from the shadows. She was still manipulating the people around him, still trying to bend his world to her will. Raylen clenched his fists, staring at the screen. Lisa had fought back, but she had been overpowered. And now, with the discovery of the pendant, Raylen knew what he was up against. Ava wasn't just a scorned woman seeking to hurt him. She was a mastermind, a puppet master pulling strings from afar. She had plotted everything, from the break-in to the presence of Max in the nursery. The worst part was, Raylen hadn't seen it coming. He had thought he could lock himself away from the world, shield his children with walls of security. But Ava had always been one step ahead. She knew how to get to him, how to strike where it hurt the most. His children, his legacy. Raylen paced back and forth in his penthouse, his mind a whirlpool of panic and anger. He had built an empire, protected it with the best security money could buy, and still, Ava had found a way back into his life. She had made sure her presence was felt even in the smallest, most terrifying ways. Not again, Raylen muttered to himself. I won't let her take everything again. But as the feed continued to show Lisa on the floor, struggling to protect the twins, the sickening truth began to settle in. He might already be too late. Raylen's fingers hovered over the phone, his heart thundering in his chest. He knew he had to act fast. Ava was coming for him, for his children. And if he didn't stop her now, there would be nothing left to save. He pressed the phone to his ear, dialing the police. The sirens were the only thing that might stop the chaos that had already started to unfold. Raylen watched helpless as the shadows in his life grew longer. The pendant, the broken bassinet, the bloodied form of his maid, each of these things were reminders of a past that had come back to haunt him. And this time he wouldn't be caught off guard. He wouldn't let Ava win. The hours after the break-in passed in a blur of police interviews, emergency room visits, and half-formed thoughts. Raylen barely slept, his mind racing, trying to piece together the events that had just unfolded. But amid the chaos, one thing kept resurfacing in his mind. The image of Lisa lying bloodied on the floor, her arms tightly wrapped around his twins, as if her life depended on keeping them safe. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. A text from the police, confirming the arrival of the paramedics with Lisa. Raylen read it twice, his thoughts still swirling. Something didn't sit right with him. Lisa wasn't just an ordinary maid. She hadn't just protected his children out of instinct. There was more to her. Raylen found himself standing outside the hospital room, his hand on the doorknob, uncertain. Lisa had been treated for her injuries, her bruises and cuts tending to, but she was still unconscious. The paramedics had said she'd lost a lot of blood, but her survival was a testament to her resilience. He had yet to ask her the one question that gnawed at him. The nurse entered, and without waiting for permission, Raylen stepped inside. Lisa was propped up in bed, a 4-line inserted into her arm. Her face was pale, but her eyes were peaceful, as though she were sleeping off a nightmare. She's recovering well, the nurse said softly, seeing Raylen's concern. But she'll need some time. Raylen nodded, though his mind was still far from the present. As he sat down beside her bed, his thoughts drifted back to the night of the break-in. How had she been able to fight off the intruder? She wasn't just lucky. She had held her ground with unnatural calm. It was as if she had been trained for something like this. A knock on the door interrupted his reverie. It was Detective Rodriguez, the officer in charge of the investigation. She stepped in, a file in her hand, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Holt, we've made a breakthrough on the intruder, Rodriguez said, sitting down across from him. But I think it's time you know more about Lisa. Something I uncovered in her background might explain why she reacted the way she did. Raylen's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, he asked. Rodriguez opened the file, revealing a series of documents. Lisa Brown, age 32, enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps at 18, served for 10 years before leaving as a decorated sergeant. She was trained in both combat and crisis management. Raylen's jaw tightened. A Marine? Rodriguez nodded. She's not just a maid, Mr. Holt. She's a highly trained combat specialist with experience in dangerous, high-stress situations. She wasn't just protecting your children. She was using skills she likely learned in the service. Raylen leaned back, stunned. Lisa's quiet demeanor had always seemed too good to be true. He had thought she was just a calm, capable woman who cared deeply for his children. But now, hearing about her military background, it all made sense. She had faced danger before, and not only had she survived it, she thrived in it. She's not just a caretaker, Raylen muttered under his breath, his mind spinning. She's a protector. Rodriguez gave a small smile. It's obvious, isn't it? Raylen stood up, his eyes still glued to the file. What else do you know about her? Rodriguez sighed. Nothing else of concern, really. She's kept a low profile since leaving the Marines. There's no indication she's involved in anything criminal. But based on her military history, it's clear she was more than capable of handling the situation last night. Raylen's emotions were a mix of awe and gratitude. How had he misjudged her for so long? How had he not seen the quiet strength behind her soft-spoken nature? Over the next few days, Raylen visited Lisa in the hospital, the weight of his guilt growing heavier with each passing hour. He had never questioned Lisa's ability to care for the children, but he had never fully trusted her either. Not since Ava's betrayal had made him question everyone around him. He had placed cameras in his house not because of Lisa, but because of his fear of history repeating itself. He had been terrified that someone would take advantage of his trust again. But Lisa had proved herself in a way Raylen hadn't expected. She wasn't just a nanny. She was a warrior. It wasn't just her physical strength that had impressed him. It was the way she handled herself, the way she had managed to protect the twins even when she was overwhelmed. It had been instinct, yes, but it was also training, precision, and control. She had fought like someone who knew exactly how to survive a life-or-death situation. As the days wore on, Raylen found himself opening up to her more. He started confiding in her slowly, hesitantly, about the fallout from his past, his fears for his children, and his constant paranoia. She never judged him. She listened. She didn't try to fix him, didn't offer shallow words of comfort. She just listened quietly, calmly, with that same steady presence she had brought into his home. And somehow, despite everything he'd been through, Raylen began to feel something else, a sense of trust. It was strange, almost foreign, but it was there. For the first time in months, he felt as if there was someone in his life he could depend on, someone who would never let him down. It was during one of these quiet conversations that Raylen began to understand the true depth of his feelings for Lisa. She wasn't just taking care of his children. She was slowly piecing together the shattered parts of his own life. He had been running from his past, hiding in the fortress of his wealth and security systems, hoping to keep the world out. But Lisa had shown him that it wasn't walls that would keep his children safe. It was trust. Trust in the right people. Raylen hadn't realized it. But Lisa had become more than just a maid to him. She was becoming an integral part of his world. Someone he could trust not just with his children, but with his fears, his scars, and his soul. In a strange way, Lisa had become his anchor in a storm. The thought scared him, but it also comforted him. It was a new feeling, something he hadn't known since Ava had left. And it was one he didn't want to let go of. Lisa's presence in his life had become essential. As Raylen spent more time with her, he realized that she wasn't just protecting the twins. She was protecting him too. And in a world where betrayal had once been his constant companion, Lisa was the one person who remained unshaken. In that moment, Raylen realized just how much he had underestimated her, and how much he needed her. Raylen stood in the study, the sharp scent of polished wood filling the air. His mind was still whirling from the discoveries of the past few days. Everything had felt like it was falling into place too easily, too neatly. And yet every new revelation only left more questions hanging in the air. Max Carter, an old associate of Ava's and the man who had broken into his home, was sitting across from him, looking unervingly calm despite the circumstances. His hands were folded in his lap, his eyes scanning Raylen as if evaluating his next move. But there was something about Max that told Raylen this man knew more than he was letting on. Raylen's grip on the edge of the desk tightened, his fingers digging into the wood. "Max," he began, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "I know you had a part in this. The break-in. Everything that's been happening. You're going to tell me everything, starting with what Ava's planning." Max hesitated for a moment before his lips curled into a knowing smile. "You're smarter than she gave you credit for." Raylen's patience was thinning. Enough with the games. What is she after? What was the real reason behind the break-in? Max leaned back in his chair, eyes flicking toward the door as if considering escape. But the weight of the moment settled back into him. "It's not what you think. Ava never left to get away from you. She left to take everything from you. And she's still pulling the strings even now." Raylen's breath caught in his throat. "What are you talking about?" Max sighed, the weight of his words palpable in the air. "Ava doesn't just want to hurt you. That's too easy for her. She wants to destroy you, your legacy, your business, your empire. She wants to take everything you've worked for, everything you've built. She wants control of it all. She's been orchestrating this from the shadows since you left." Raylen felt his heart hammer in his chest, each beat laced with a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. Ava, the woman he had once loved, had planned this, planned his emotional destruction and his financial ruin. His mind flashed to the months before her departure, the way she had taken everything with her, without even an explanation. But now, hearing Max confirm it, it all made twisted sense. Max continued, "I was a pawn in her game, just like everyone else. She knew exactly what she was doing. She manipulated people, including me, to do her bidding. That break-in? That wasn't random. She had me plant the camera systems and had me target the house for sensitive information. She was going after the files on your business dealings, your corporate investments, anything she could use to regain control. She didn't just want the money. She wanted your power. She wants to hold you under her thumb, Raylen." Raylen's stomach churned. This wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated cold, and far worse than he could have imagined. Ava had turned every aspect of their life into a weapon to destroy him, even after she was gone. And now, the puppet strings of her influence were still tightening around his neck. "But why now?" Raylen asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and fury. "Why the hell would she wait this long?" Max's gaze darkened. "Because she knew you'd be vulnerable. She knew the only way to break you was to wait for the right moment. After she left, she knew you'd isolate yourself, make yourself paranoid. You'd surround yourself with walls, and you'd push everyone away. But she also knew that she could use that against you. You were always afraid of being betrayed again, afraid to trust anyone. So she made sure you couldn't trust anyone, not even her maid." Raylen's mind reeled at Max's words. Lisa. He had trusted her. He had even begun to rely on her more than anyone in his life. Yet here he was, listening to Max reveal that she was, in a way, another piece in Ava's game. He couldn't reconcile the person Lisa had been to him, the woman who cared for his children, protected them when no one else was around, with this shadow of manipulation that Max was describing. But what other explanation could there be for everything that had happened? Max seemed to read Raylen's mind. Lisa wasn't a part of the plan, at least not intentionally. She just became a tool Ava could use. She saw your attachment to her, your growing dependence. Ava had been watching you, manipulating the situation to her advantage. She used her power, her charm, and she made sure that no one could ever be trusted in your life. It's all part of the same game. She's playing both sides. The truth stung. Raylen had built his life on trust, on the idea that people could be counted on, that family mattered. But Ava had poisoned that concept long ago, and now, in her absence, her manipulations had taken root so deeply that Raylen's every decision had been twisted. Raylen stood up, pacing, his thoughts a maelstrom. She's been playing me from the beginning. Even after she left, she never stopped controlling me. His voice was low, almost a growl. How could I have been so blind? Max shrugged, his eyes glinting with a strange mixture of pity and disdain. Ava's always been good at that, getting into your head, making you feel like you're the one in control when you're really not. She knows how to make you doubt yourself, Raylen. That's how she does it. That's how she breaks you. Raylen's hands balled into fists. And I've let her. I've been letting her pull my strings without even knowing it. Max didn't offer any words of comfort. He had no right. He had been complicit in all of this. But his silence spoke volumes. Ava had engineered a masterpiece of manipulation, and Raylen had been too emotionally wounded to see it. A surge of anger washed over him, quick and sharp. This wasn't just about protecting his assets anymore. This was about protecting his children, his future, and his freedom. He was done being a pawn, done letting Ava control his every move. I'm done, Raylen said, his voice colder than the steel in his spine. She's not getting another inch. I'm going to take back everything she's tried to take from me, and I'll protect my children with everything I have. Max remained silent, his gaze steady. Raylen's mind raced as he looked out the window, his resolve hardening. He had spent too long letting Ava's shadow dictate his actions. Now it was time to act, to rebuild, and to destroy the remnants of her control. Raylen wasn't just going to protect his business empire. He was going to make sure that Ava never had the power to hurt him again, because if there was one thing he knew for sure now, it was that he would never let her win. His children were counting on him, and Raylen wasn't about to let Ava take anything more from him. Raylen stood in the mansion's expansive garden, the cool night air biting at his skin as he faced Max Carter. The vast estate stretched out behind him, silent and still, the weight of the moment pressing down on both men. In the distance, the mansion's lights flickered, casting long shadows across the garden. Raylen's eyes were locked onto Max, his fists clenched at his sides. The final confrontation was long overdue. Max, for his part, seemed unbothered by the tension. He stood with his hands in his pockets, a faint smirk on his lips, as if he hadn't just been a part of a violent break-in and conspiracy. His confidence only fueled Raylen's anger, a bitter reminder of the many years of manipulation and deceit. You always were good at hiding in the shadows, Max, Raylen said, his voice low and venomous. But not anymore. I know the truth now. Max's eyes flicked to Raylen with an almost bored expression. You don't know everything, Raylen. You never did. Ava, she's not like you. She doesn't play by your rules. He took a slow step forward. You never had a chance against her, not really. She always knew how to twist you, how to get inside your head. Raylen's heart pounded in his chest, the anger and betrayal mixing into something raw and untamed. She's been controlling me, us, since the moment she left. But this, Max, this is where it ends. She's not going to destroy my family any longer. Max let out a sharp laugh, the sound almost mocking. You think you can stop her? You're nothing but a pawn, Raylen. And as much as you like to think you've got it all figured out, you're still playing into her game. You always will. Raylen stepped closer, his voice steady and dangerous. I'm not playing anymore. Not with you, not with Ava, not with anyone. This is my life, my children's lives, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take that from us. Max's smirk faltered for a moment, but then he quickly regained his composure. He was used to manipulating situations, used to playing people like chess pieces. But Raylen wasn't the same man anymore. He had learned, and he wasn't going to back down. "You'll regret this," Max spat, his words dripping with venom. "Ava's got more power than you think. She's already got her fingers in every corner of your life. You can't escape that. None of you can." As the two men faced off, the tension in the air grew heavier. Raylen could feel his pulse quicken, the weight of everything he had learned coming to a head. He had never truly understood just how deep Ava's influence ran until now. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He wasn't going to let her have the final say. Just as Raylen's anger threatened to boil over, a calm but firm voice interrupted the exchange. "Enough." Both men turned to see Lisa standing at the edge of the garden, her posture straight and resolute. She had been a quiet presence in Raylen's life, always tending to the children, always in the background. But now, in this moment, she was something else entirely. She wasn't just the caretaker. She was standing before them as a protector. In her hand, she held a small but deadly weapon, a gun, its cold metal gleaming in the moonlight. Raylen's breath caught as he saw the determination in her eyes. Lisa wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready to fight, not just for the twins, but for him, for everything they had built together. Max's eyes narrowed, his demeanor shifting from arrogance to wary caution. "You think you can stop me? She thinks she can stop me?" He took a step back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Look, sweetheart, you don't know who you're dealing with." Lisa's gaze never wavered. "I know exactly who you are," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "And I'm not afraid of you." Raylen stood frozen for a moment, his mind still catching up with the sight before him. Lisa, his quiet, reserved maid, was standing her ground, her strength and resolve clear for the first time. She wasn't the fragile woman he had once perceived. She was a force in her own right. Max didn't know what to make of it. He was used to people cowering, afraid to act. But Lisa wasn't like that. He could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her to protect his children in the nursery. She had fought once to keep them safe, and she would do it again now if it meant stopping him. Max shifted on his feet, the arrogance slowly draining from his face. The truth of the situation was sinking in. He had underestimated the strength of the people he was dealing with. Lisa wasn't just another victim in Ava's game. She had become the final obstacle in Ava's plan, and now it was too late to turn back. Raylen watched as Max's expression changed, his cocky smile replaced by uncertainty. He stepped forward, taking control of the moment. "I'm done being controlled, Max. I'm done letting people like you dictate what happens to me, to my family." His voice grew colder, sharper. "You and Ava, you've crossed the line. This ends now." Before Max could respond, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Police lights flashed in the garden's reflection, growing louder by the second. Max's face twisted in frustration, but it was too late. The law was here, and it wasn't just Raylen who was going to stop him. His game was over. Max bolted for the back gate, but before he could take more than 2 steps, the police arrived, surrounding him with guns drawn. "Down on the ground, hands where we can see them," one of the officers shouted. Max hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation finally hitting him. He had lost. There was no escape now. 2 officers stepped forward and cuffed Max, pulling him to the ground as he muttered under his breath, still defiant, "You can't stop her. You can't stop any of this." Raylen didn't respond. He didn't need to. The fact that Max was in handcuffs was all the confirmation he needed. This chapter of his life was over. But the true battle, the one for his children's safety and his own peace of mind, was far from won. As the police began to escort Max away, Raylen turned to Lisa, his eyes meeting hers. There was no need for word between them. The trust was there, solidified in the face of danger. He had seen her for who she truly was, and now he knew he could count on her, no matter what came next. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, Raylen felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had his children, he had Lisa, and he would do whatever it took to make sure that Ava's influence never touched him again. The day Ava was arrested felt like a strange, hollow victory. Raylen stood in the grand foyer of his mansion, staring out at the rain that had started to fall, washing away the remnants of the chaos that had unfolded over the past week. The news had spread quickly. Ava was in custody. She had been tracked down to a small apartment, holed up with a few of her most loyal associates. The arrest had been swift, the handcuffs clicking in place as she was read her rights. The police had taken her away, but the impact of her actions had left a mark that would take a long time to heal. Raylen's phone buzzed in his hand, but he barely glanced at it. He could feel a sense of relief, but it was tainted by the realization of what had happened. The control Ava had held over him for so long, the way she had manipulated every aspect of his life, even after she had left. Her reach had been insidious, and though she was now behind bars, the damage she had done to his peace of mind was something that couldn't be undone with a simple arrest. The arrest was almost anticlimactic. After everything that had happened, Raylen had expected more drama, more confrontation. But Ava had gone quietly, almost as though she had expected this moment to come. The police had cuffed her and read her the charges, but there was no anger in her eyes, no defiance. It was as if she had already accepted her fate. Raylen had always known that Ava had a hold on him, but seeing her subdued in front of him, knowing that she was finally paying the price for her manipulations, left him feeling both relieved and strangely empty. She had left a trail of destruction in her wake, and it had taken everything for him to rebuild the fragments of his life. But now it was over. She was gone, locked away, and her schemes had finally come to a crashing halt. The police would continue their investigation, but for Raylen, the hardest part was done. Ava had stolen his trust, his peace, his family, and now she was going to pay for it. Raylen sat at the kitchen table, staring at the legal papers in front of him. He hadn't expected to make this decision so soon, but with Ava out of the picture, it was clear to him what needed to be done. The twins needed stability. They needed someone who would care for them with the same devotion that Raylen had been unable to provide in the wake of everything. Lisa had been their rock, the steady hand in the chaos. He had watched her bond with the twins, protect them, and fight to keep them safe when everything had fallen apart. She had shown him something he hadn't realized he was missing: unwavering loyalty and strength in the face of danger. As he sat there, a sense of clarity washed over him. He picked up the phone and dialed the lawyer's number. "Hello, it's Raylen Holt," he said when the call was answered. "I need to make a change in the guardianship arrangement. I'd like to appoint Lisa Brown as the permanent legal guardian of my children." The lawyer was surprised, but the decision was final. Raylen had thought long and hard about it, and he knew that it wasn't just the right choice, it was the only choice. Lisa had been there for him and the twins when no one else had. She had earned this. As the days passed, Raylen couldn't shake the feeling of quiet reflection that had taken over him. He had always been a man who trusted in his success, in his wealth, in the fortress he had built around his life. But Ava had torn all that down, and it had taken someone like Lisa, someone strong, capable, and selfless, to rebuild what was broken. Raylen stood in the nursery, looking down at the twins sleeping peacefully in their cribs. The room was calm now, the chaos from that night long gone. He could feel the weight of the past few months lifting off his shoulders. He had been a man at war with himself, fighting against the paranoia and fear that Ava's betrayal had planted in him. But now, standing here with his children, he felt something else: hope. He glanced over at Lisa, who was quietly cleaning up in the corner of the room. She had become so much more than just a maid. She was a part of his family now. Her presence had grounded him, helped him see that there was more to life than just business and power. There was love, there was trust, there was a future to be built. Raylen exhaled slowly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The battle with Ava was over, but the real fight, rebuilding his life, rebuilding his family, was just beginning. And this time, he wasn't going to do it alone. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light across the nursery, Raylen turned to Lisa. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity, "for everything." Lisa looked up from her work, her expression soft. She didn't need to say anything. Her actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. She was here, with him, and that was enough. Raylen nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude he hadn't known he was capable of. He had been lost in the darkness for so long, but now he was beginning to see the light again. Ava had taken so much from him, but she hadn't taken everything. He still had his children. He still had Lisa. And for the first time in years, Raylen felt a true sense of freedom. The past was behind him. It was time to look ahead, time to rebuild what was lost, time to protect what mattered most. The early mornings had become a new routine for Raylen. The house, once cold and full of echoes, now felt alive again. The laughter of Layla and Alex echoed through the halls, a sound that had been missing for too long. It was a sound Raylen had taken for granted before, but now it was the rhythm of life he clung to. He stood by the window in the kitchen, the morning light spilling in as he watched Lisa move through the house, preparing breakfast for the twins. She moved with a quiet grace, her every action measured and precise, yet full of warmth. For the first time in months, Raylen didn't feel the need to control every detail. He didn't need to be the perfect father, the perfect businessman. He just needed to be present. It had taken time, but Raylen had begun to realize that he wasn't alone anymore. The walls he had built around himself were finally coming down piece by piece, and Lisa, with her quiet strength, had been there every step of the way. She was no longer just the maid or the caretaker. She was the steady presence in his life, the one person who had stayed when everything else had fallen apart. Raylen never thought he would be the kind of man to share his vulnerabilities with anyone. He had spent so many years burying his feelings, hiding behind his wealth and his success. But with Lisa, it was different. Over the past few weeks, he had found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't expected. The fear of being hurt again, the bitterness left over from Ava's betrayal, all of it had weighed heavily on his heart. But Lisa listened. She didn't push him, didn't ask for more than he was willing to give. And slowly, he began to let her in. One evening, as the twins slept soundly in their cribs, Raylen found himself sitting across from Lisa at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand. It was rare for him to let his guard down, but tonight felt different. The weight of everything that had happened over the past year had started to settle. And for the first time, Raylen felt like he could breathe. "Lisa," he began, his voice steady but soft, "there's something I've never told anyone. I've always kept it to myself, buried it deep down. But I think it's time I let it out." Lisa didn't say anything at first. She simply looked at him, her eyes calm and understanding. She had seen the way he carried his burden, the way he distanced himself from the world, from people. She knew this wasn't easy for him. "I've always been afraid," Raylen continued, his voice quieter now. "Afraid of trusting people, afraid of opening up. I thought if I kept everything locked down, no one could hurt me. But I was wrong." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Ava, she destroyed me, not just emotionally, but in ways I never thought possible. She took everything, my trust, my family, my peace of mind. I don't even know who I am anymore because of her." Lisa listened intently, her gaze never wavering. She didn't need to say anything. She understood. It was the quiet moments like this that had brought them closer. Raylen had spent so much of his life pushing people away, but Lisa had been there, steadfast, unyielding. "I guess," Raylen said, his voice cracking slightly, "I didn't realize how much I needed someone, not just to take care of the twins, but to be there for me, to remind me that I'm not alone." Lisa placed her hand gently on his, her touch warm and reassuring. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it meant more to Raylen than he could ever express. She had never asked for anything in return. She had just been there, watching over his children and giving him the space he needed to heal. "I'm here, Raylen," Lisa said softly. "I've always been here. You're not alone in this." As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Raylen began to see Lisa in a new light, not just as a caretaker, but as someone who had become an essential part of his life. She wasn't just filling a role. She was becoming a fixture in his world, someone he trusted implicitly. They began to spend more time together, talking about everything and nothing. Lisa shared stories of her time in the Marines, her struggles, her triumphs. She wasn't one to open up easily, but with Raylen, she felt safe. He wasn't like the other men she had worked for. He wasn't just concerned with appearances or status. He was real, and that was something she had never found before. Raylen, in turn, began to see the strength behind Lisa's calm demeanor. She wasn't just taking care of the twins. She was teaching him how to let go of his fears, how to trust again. There were moments when he would catch her looking at him, her gaze steady and unwavering, and he would realize that she wasn't just caring for his children. She was caring for him, too. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the twins asleep in their cribs, Raylen looked over at Lisa. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd trust anyone again, but you've shown me that I can. You've shown me that there's more to life than just surviving. There's living." Lisa smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "It's not about surviving, Raylen," she said. "It's about finding something worth fighting for. And you found that. Your family, your children. That's worth everything." Raylen nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I know now. I just didn't know how to see it before." In the weeks that followed, Raylen's outlook on life began to shift. He had always believed that family was about blood, about who shared his last name. But now, as he watched Lisa interact with Layla and Alex, he realized that family wasn't about genetics. It was about the people who chose to stand by you, who chose to fight for you, even when the world seemed to turn its back. Lisa had chosen to stand by him. She had chosen to stay when things were at their worst. And now Raylen was beginning to realize that she wasn't just his protector. She was his partner. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, watching the twins play in the yard, Raylen turned to Lisa. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But choosing you to be part of my life wasn't one of them." Lisa smiled, her eyes soft with affection. "I never wanted anything more than to be here, with you, with them." Raylen felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't known in a long time. It was the warmth of trust, the warmth of family. As the twins ran around the yard, laughing and playing, Raylen realized that this was the new beginning he had been waiting for. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a family, one that was built not on blood, but on loyalty, trust, and the people who chose to stand by him. And with that, Raylen knew that his life and his family had finally come full circle. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling garden. Raylen stood by the nursery window, his arms crossed, watching as the evening light filtered softly into the room. The twins were asleep in their cribs, their little bodies rising and falling with the rhythmic sound of their breaths. It was a peaceful sight, one that had once seemed so far out of reach. He had come a long way from the man he used to be, the one who measured success in bank balances and power, the man who had allowed fear to guide his decisions, who had built walls to keep out the world, only to find himself alone and vulnerable in the end. His world had been turned upside down when Ava left, but in the chaos that followed, something beautiful had emerged. Raylen had learned what mattered most. It wasn't the fortune he had accumulated over the years or the empire he had built. It wasn't the accolades, the business deals, or the polished image he had worked so hard to maintain. No, the most important things in life were the people you surrounded yourself with, the ones who chose to stay, who chose to fight for you, who stood by you when everything else fell apart. The journey had been long, filled with moments of doubt and fear. But Raylen had found peace in the most unexpected places. It had come in the form of a quiet woman, once just a maid, who had become his protector, his confidant, and the one person he trusted above all others, Lisa. He thought back to the days after Ava's departure, when he was consumed by paranoia and distrust. He had closed himself off from everyone, convinced that the only way to protect himself was to keep everyone at arm's length. But in doing so, he had forgotten what it meant to trust, to truly rely on someone. Lisa had reminded him of that. She had shown him that trust wasn't something that could be earned through contracts or wealth. It was built through time, through shared experiences, through the willingness to protect and stand by each other. As he looked down at the twins, his heart swelled with a love he had never known. Layla and Alex were his legacy now, not the business empire he had spent so many years building. His children were the ones who would carry his name, but more importantly, they would carry the lessons he had learned, the lessons of loyalty, trust, and protection. Raylen turned away from the window and walked over to the rocking chair beside the crib. Lisa was sitting there, softly humming a lullaby as she rocked Layla to sleep. Her presence was a comfort, a constant in a world that had once felt so unpredictable. "You've been incredible, Lisa," Raylen said quietly, taking a seat beside her. "I never thought I'd find someone like you, someone who could fill the void in my life that I didn't even know was there." Lisa smiled, her eyes soft with affection. "I'm just doing what any of us would do, Raylen. You're not alone anymore." Raylen leaned back in the chair, his gaze fixed on the twins. They had grown so much in the time since Lisa had come into their lives, and he knew that it was because of her, because of the love and care she had poured into them. "I've spent so much of my life thinking that I had to protect everything," Raylen continued. "The house, the money, the business. But I see now that it's the people who matter, the ones who are there when it counts." Lisa's hand brushed against his. "And you've got the best people by your side." Raylen looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I never could have done this without you. Without you, I'd still be lost in the past, stuck in a world that's not real." The room fell silent, save for the soft sound of Layla's breathing. Raylen sat still, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. He had been through so much, faced countless challenges, but in the end he had found what he had been searching for all along: a family. A family not born of blood, but of choice. A family built on trust, loyalty, and protection. Raylen glanced at Lisa again. Her eyes closed as she continued to hum softly. He knew now that the life he had once fought so hard to control didn't matter as much as the life he was building now. With Lisa, with the twins, he had everything he needed. He stood slowly, his gaze lingering on the crib where Layla and Alex slept soundly. He knew that they were safe now, that they would grow up in a world where love and loyalty were the foundation, not fear and betrayal. As he turned to leave, he whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else, "This time, the family I've built is strong, unbreakable, and mine to protect." And as the door to the nursery closed quietly behind him, Raylen felt a weight lift from his shoulders, the kind of weight that had been there for so long, a weight that had kept him from truly living. Now, for the first time in years, Raylen was free.